An entire civilization can disappear from history. Across continents and millennia, powerful dynasties have risen, ruled, and then vanished, leaving behind little more than a ghostly echo. We are about to become detectives, tracking 30 of these lost kingdoms. By the end, you will know the stories of empires erased by sand, sea, and silence. How does a line of mighty kings simply dissolve, leaving no name and no chronicle behind? What does it mean for a people to forget their own rulers? The journey begins with a dynasty so ancient, its very existence was once considered a myth. The first ghost in our long list is a dynasty that was supposed to have never existed at all. For centuries, the Xia dynasty was nothing more than a beautiful origin story, a foundational myth for Chinese civilization recorded in ancient texts written long after it was said to have ended. According to tradition, a great sage king named Yu the Great founded the Xia around 4,000 years ago. His legendary achievement was taming a catastrophic, generation-spanning flood. He didn't just build dams, he reshaped the very landscape, dredging rivers and carving out channels with such devotion that he was said to have worn the hair off his legs and passed his own house 3 times without entering. This wasn't just a story about a hero. It was a story about the birth of ordered society from chaos, about a dynasty that established the very model of virtuous rule. The texts credited the Xia with monumental advancements, from establishing the first hereditary monarchy to pioneering bronze casting and creating a calendar. Yet for modern historians, a major problem remained. There was not a single piece of writing from that time that mentioned the Xia. No inscriptions, no royal chronicles on bone or bronze, nothing that could be called a contemporary record. It lived solely in the memory of later dynasties like the Shang and the Zhou, who spoke of it as their predecessor. This left a glaring, silent gap between late Neolithic cultures and the solid, verified history of the Shang dynasty with its abundant oracle bones. So, was the Xia just a convenient political fiction, a creation myth invented to give ancient authority to later rulers? The debate raged until shovels began to hit the earth. In the 1960s, archaeologists began excavating a vast site at Erasure in the Yellow River Valley. What they uncovered was staggering, a sprawling, sophisticated Bronze Age capital that flourished at exactly the time the Xia was said to have ruled. They found palatial foundations that spoke of a centralized, powerful state. They uncovered advanced bronze workshops, producing intricate ritual vessels and weapons that suddenly made the legendary Xia bronze technology seem plausible. Most compellingly, they found the earliest evidence of a planned, palatial urban center in East Asia, complete with a rigid north-south orientation that would become a hallmark of Chinese imperial architecture for millennia. Erasure displayed all the hallmarks of a dynastic capital, yet its name was lost. No inscriptions at the site proclaim it as the capital of Xia. This is the heart of the mystery and why the Xia remains on our list of forgotten dynasties. The archaeological evidence screams that a powerful, complex kingdom existed in that chronological gap, a kingdom that matches the descriptions in the old texts. Yet, without that definitive, written self-identification, the line between hard evidence and cherished tradition remains blurred. It is a dynasty caught between the certainty of archaeology and the silence of its own records, a ghost that is slowly gaining substance but still refuses to fully reveal its name. That tantalizing gap between myth and material evidence is not unique to China. Travel west to the banks of the Nile, and you will find a similar, even more profound silence at the very dawn of recorded history. We all know the story of the first pharaoh of a unified Egypt, Nama, immortalized on his famous palette showing him wearing the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt. But what if Nama was not the beginning but the triumphant conclusion? This is where we enter the realm of Dynasty Zero, a modern term for the shadowy rulers who walked the path to kingship before history decided to write their names down. These are the true forgotten founders, the proto-pharaohs whose individual stories are almost entirely lost to the desert sands. Our primary evidence comes not from papyri, but from the ground, particularly the sacred burial grounds at Abydos. Here, archaeologists uncovered tombs far grander than simple chieftains' graves, yet not quite the full pyramids to come. They belong to figures known only by cryptic symbols on artifacts, names like Scorpion the First and Ka. The tomb of Scorpion, for instance, yielded a ceremonial mace head depicting a ruler wearing the distinctive white crown of Upper Egypt, presiding over what seems to be a ritual or a scene of tribute. It is a powerful image of authority, but it tells us nothing of his battles, his laws, or his life. Another ruler, known as Ka, had a tomb that contained serex, the earliest precursors to the royal cartouche. This serek, a rectangular panel representing the palace facade, topped with the symbol of a pair of raised arms, is one of the first declarations of a personal royal identity in human history. We have his name, but we have no story to attach to it. These tombs and their artifacts are like frozen moments in a revolution. They show the nascent stages of everything we associate with pharaonic culture, the development of royal iconography, the concentration of wealth for the afterlife, the ideological machinery of state power beginning to click into gear. These rulers were clearly consolidating territories, forging the political and spiritual template that Nama would later stamp across the entire land. Yet, for all their foundational work, they remain silhouettes. We do not know if Scorpion and Ka were fierce rivals or successive kings in a single lineage. We cannot map the full extent of their reigns or understand the specific conflicts that led to unification. They operated in the final centuries of the pre-dynastic period, a time when the idea of Egypt was being invented piece by piece. The term Dynasty Zero itself is poignant, a placeholder for what came before the official list began. It acknowledges their supreme importance while confessing our ignorance. These were not forgotten by their successors, they were absorbed. Their innovations, their symbols, their very concept of kingship became the bedrock of a civilization that would last for 3,000 years. In doing so, their individual identities were sacrificed to the greater myth of the eternal pharaoh. They paved the way for recorded history by standing just outside of its light, enigmatic ghosts whose tombs whisper of a kingdom about to be born. The silence of the unmarked grave finds a strange parallel in a civilization that mastered the art of living, but left no monuments to death. Far from the deserts of Egypt, in the fertile plains of the Indus River Valley, a society flourished for nearly 1,000 years with a sophistication that still baffles us today. This is the Harappan civilization, a realm of stunning order and eerie uniformity that stretched across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Its great cities, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were marvels of the Bronze Age. They were built on precise grid patterns with standardized brick sizes, complex covered drainage systems, and even public baths and granaries. Every street, every well, every house seemed to follow a master plan, a level of urban coordination that screams of a powerful, centralized authority. Yet here lies the core of a profound historical mystery. Who was in charge? In every other contemporary civilization, power shouts its name from towering ziggurats, ornate palaces, and lavish royal tombs filled with gold. In the Indus Valley, we find none of that. There are no grand pyramids, no colossal statues of kings, no palaces perched on acropolises. The largest structures are not temples to a god-king, but utilitarian granaries and the Great Bath, which suggests a communal or ritual purpose. The graves we do find are simple, with modest grave goods, showing little evidence of a steep social hierarchy. So what kind of rulers built this remarkably equitable and clean urban world? The complete absence of the traditional trappings of kingship forces us to rethink what power looked like. Perhaps authority was not vested in a single, glorified dynasty, but in a council of elders or a guild of master merchants who governed through trade and ritual. Some scholars point to the many clay seals found across the civilization, often depicting animals and a mysterious script, and suggest a class of priest kings who ruled through religious authority and controlled economic exchange. Others see the evidence of standardized weights and measures across a vast territory as the work of a mercantile oligarchy, an ancient board of trade that valued stability and prosperity over personal glorification. Their leadership may have been so effective, so woven into the fabric of daily life and economic ritual, that they felt no need to build statues to themselves. The true answer is locked away in their script. The Harappans left behind thousands of inscriptions on seals, tablets, and pottery, but their writing remains undeciphered, one of the great linguistic puzzles of the ancient world. It is a short, seemingly logo-syllabic script that refuses to give up its secrets, often because the inscriptions are so brief. Without a Rosetta Stone, their words are silent. This script is not just the key to their language, it is the key to their entire story, their laws, their beliefs, and the names of whatever ruling class guided them. And then, around 3,900 years ago, this meticulously ordered world began to unravel. The cities were slowly, systematically abandoned. The precise grids were swallowed by silt, and the Great Bath fell silent. Was it climate change, a catastrophic shift in the river courses that sustained them? Was it an invasion or a gradual economic collapse? Without their own records, we are left sifting through the physical evidence of decline, of failing wells and encroaching mud. The Harappan ruling class, whether priests or merchants or administrators, vanished without an epitaph, leaving behind the ghostly blueprint of their perfect cities and a whispering script that no one living can now read. This erasure of a ruling class is a deliberate act, a political weapon wielded by the victors, and perhaps no ancient people understood this better than the Egyptians, who faced a dynasty of foreign rulers they were determined to wipe from memory. For over a century, a line of kings who were not Egyptian sat on the throne of the pharaohs. They were the Hyksos, a name that later Egyptian historians translated as rulers of foreign lands, but which carried the heavy, scornful weight of invaders. Their story begins during Egypt's Second Intermediate Period, a time of fragmentation when the central power of the Middle Kingdom crumbled. Into this power vacuum from the region of the Levant came these newcomers. They did not arrive as a massive invading horde depicted in later propaganda, but likely as a gradual, persistent migration of Semitic-speaking peoples, traders and settlers who initially lived alongside Egyptians in the Nile Delta. Over generations, their influence grew, their settlements expanded, and their leaders seized power, establishing their capital at a city called Avaris. What made the Hyksos so formidable was not just numbers, but a technological leap. They introduced Egypt to revolutionary tools of war, the composite bow and the horse-drawn chariot. The composite bow, made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, was far more powerful and had a longer range than the simple wooden bows Egyptians used. And the chariot, a lightweight, horse-drawn platform carrying an archer and a driver, was the ancient equivalent of a tank, providing devastating mobile firepower. With these advantages, the Hyksos kings consolidated their rule over Lower Egypt, adopting the full titles and regalia of pharaohs. They minted scarabs with their names, built temples, and traded widely across the Mediterranean. For a time, they were simply the new rulers, a fact of life. But to the native Egyptian princes ruling from Thebes in the south, they were an abomination, a stain on the sacred order of the two lands. The Theban kings launched a long war of liberation, a conflict painted in the starkest terms of good versus evil, of restoring mad or cosmic order against the chaos of foreign rule. When the Theban king Ahmose I finally stormed Avaris and expelled the Hyksos, he initiated one of history's most successful smear campaigns. The Hyksos were recast not as legitimate pharaohs but as brutal, impious tyrants. Their monuments were torn down, their inscriptions defaced, their very names chiseled from official king lists. they were to be remembered only as a lesson in humiliation, a dark interlude before Egypt's glorious new kingdom dawn. For centuries, this was the accepted story until archaeologists began digging at the site of Avaris. What they found told a completely different tale. The city was not a crude military camp, but a thriving cosmopolitan capital. The pottery, architecture, and burial customs revealed a fascinating cultural blend, a fusion of Egyptian and Canaanite styles. They found Minoan frescoes on palace walls, evidence of far-reaching trade networks. Most tellingly, they found evidence that the Hyksos had worshipped the Egyptian god Set, associating him with their own storm god. This was not a story of simple destruction, but of complex coexistence and adaptation before the violent divorce. The Hyksos dynasty was erased not because it was insignificant, but because it was a profound embarrassment, a reminder that the timeless land of the pharaohs could be and was ruled by outsiders. Their true legacy, however, endured in the very tools that would build the Egyptian empire, the chariots and bows their Theban conquerors eagerly adopted to forge their own age of conquest. The deliberate erasure of a dynasty is one thing, but what about a people who erased themselves simply by succeeding? The end of the Bronze Age was not a gentle sunset, but a violent, world-shattering storm. Around 3,200 years ago, the entire interconnected world of the Eastern Mediterranean, from the mighty Hittite Empire in Anatolia to the wealthy city-states of Canaan, came crashing down in a cascade of fire, famine, and ruin. Palaces that had stood for centuries were burned to their foundations, grand kingdoms fractured into tiny villages. The art of writing itself was lost in many regions for generations. And at the heart of this cataclysm, both blamed and shrouded in mystery, are the Sea Peoples. They are the ultimate ghost dynasty, a collection of names without a homeland, conquerors without a chronicle. Egyptian records, our main source, do not describe a single nation, but a confederation of different groups with strange, resonant names: the Peliset, the Shekelesh, the Denyon, the Weshesh. They arrived from the sea in waves, not as mere pirates, but as entire migrating populations, with ox carts carrying their women and children alongside their warriors. The great pharaoh Ramesses III immortalized his desperate victory over them in stunning reliefs on his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. The carvings show a chaotic naval battle, with Egyptian archers firing from sleek ships into the crowded vessels of their foes, who wear distinctive feathered or horned helmets. These are not faceless hordes, they are depicted with careful detail, suggesting the Egyptians knew exactly who they were fighting. Yet, in a final, frustrating twist, the inscriptions celebrate the pharaoh's triumph without ever naming a single enemy king or chieftain. The leaders of the Sea Peoples remain anonymous silhouettes in their own apocalyptic story. This silence is the core of the mystery. Who were these men who could orchestrate the downfall of empires? They were likely not a unified nation, but a coalition of the displaced, the desperate, and the ambitious. One compelling theory suggests they were themselves the shattered remnants of fallen royal houses. Imagine the scenario: a drought or famine collapses a smaller kingdom in Anatolia or the Aegean. Its army, now a leaderless band of skilled warriors, takes to ships. They join with refugees from another failed state, then another, picking up skilled sailors and desperate farmers along the coast. What began as a flight from disaster morphs into an unstoppable migratory force, a rolling avalanche of humanity that gains strength by consuming the very kingdoms in its path. They were less an invading army and more a symptom of a total systemic failure, a feedback loop of collapse. Their great tragedy, and the reason they left no trace of a dynasty, is that their victories dissolved their identities. When some groups, like the likely Peliset, were finally defeated by Egypt and settled on the southern coast of Canaan, they ceased being Sea Peoples. They became the Philistines of biblical fame, eventually adopting local customs and languages. others may have sailed west, their lineages blending into the populations of Sardinia or Sicily, names preserved only in vague geographical echoes. They were a leadership born from the end of a world, and when that world finished ending, there was no place left for their royal lines to take root. They vanished into the very chaos they helped create, leaving behind only their ominous title and the enduring image of their feathered helmets on an Egyptian wall. From the chaos of the sea peoples, we travel to a different kind of silence, one carved in stone and buried in the jungles of the Americas. The colossal heads of the Olmec are some of the most arresting faces in the ancient world. 17 of these massive basalt sculptures, some weighing over 20 tons, stare out from the landscape of the Mexican Gulf Coast with an expression of stern, unblinking authority. Each is unique, with distinct facial features, headdresses, and expressions, leading most scholars to a compelling conclusion: these are portraits of individual Olmec rulers. They are the undeniable proof of a powerful elite, of kings who commanded the labor to quarry stone from mountains over 50 miles away and transport it, without the wheel or pack animals, through swamps and rivers to their ceremonial centers. Yet these stone sovereigns are utterly mute. We do not know a single one of their names. This is the central paradox of the Olmec, the so-called mother culture of Mesoamerica. From around 3,200 to 2,400 years ago, they built the first complex societies in the region, establishing the template for everything that would follow: the Maya, the Zapotec, Teotihuacan. Their sites, like San Lorenzo and La Venta, were not mere villages but elaborate ceremonial complexes with massive earthen pyramids, intricate drainage systems made of stone, and vast plazas designed for public spectacle. Their art is breathtakingly sophisticated, from the delicate jade celts depicting wood jaguar deities to the polished mirrors made of magnetite. Most astonishingly, they appear to have developed the earliest writing in the Americas, with glyphs on stone slabs and portable artifacts like the Cascajal block, which bears a sequence of 62 distinct symbols. They had all the hallmarks of a civilization with a recorded history. But where are their chronicles? Where are the lists of succession, the tales of conquest and dynasty that should accompany such powerful rulers immortalized in stone? The political structure of the Olmec world remains one of its deepest shadows. The colossal heads imply individual, charismatic leadership, perhaps god-kings who claimed descent from supernatural jaguar ancestors. The sheer effort required to create and position each head was a monumental act of political propaganda, a permanent declaration of a ruler's might visible to all. Yet at sites like La Venta, the arrangement of these heads and other monuments in precise astronomical alignments suggests a society governed by a shared, sacred cosmology, possibly administered by a priestly class rather than a single, all-powerful dynasty. One prevailing theory is that the Olmec may have practiced a form of rule by council or rotating leadership among elite families, with the colossal heads representing lineage founders or particularly influential figures, not necessarily a sequential line of kings. Another, more practical answer lies in the materials they used. Unlike the Egyptians who carved their history on temple walls, or the Mesopotamians who baked theirs on clay tablets, the Olmec may have recorded their histories on perishable materials. They likely used bark paper or deerskin codices, painted with vivid glyphs and stored in humid jungle environments. These documents, if they ever existed, would have turned to dust centuries ago, leaving only the cryptic stone monuments behind. Their writing system, still largely undeciphered, offers no clear royal titles or narratives we can yet understand, so we are left with these magnificent, silent faces. They represent a dynasty, or perhaps multiple dynasties, of profound influence whose very names were washed away by time, climate, and the fragility of their own records. They built the foundation of Mesoamerican civilization and then stepped back into the jungle, leaving only their stone visages to challenge us with a question: how do you remember a king when you have forgotten his name? silent stone faces give way to a palace without walls, a kingdom that seemed to trust the sea more than swords. On the island of Crete, the Minoan civilization built a world of breathtaking beauty and profound mystery. Their greatest palace, Knossos, was not a fortress but a labyrinthine wonder, a sprawling complex of courtyards, storerooms, and living quarters adorned with vivid frescoes of leaping dolphins, elegant court ladies, and the sacred bull. This art reveals a society that celebrated life, nature, and ritual above all else. And at the center of this vibrant world stands a ghostly figure known to us only through art, the Minoan priest king. A restored fresco shows a youthful, slender man wearing a majestic crown of lilies and peacock feathers, carrying a ceremonial staff. He is not depicted leading armies or smiting enemies, but presiding over sacred ceremonies. This image suggests a ruler whose authority flowed not from the battlefield, but from the temple, a king who was the chief intermediary between his people and the divine. This blend of secular and religious power may explain one of the Minoans' most striking features, the conspicuous absence of defensive walls around their grand palaces. In an age of conquest, Knossos and its sister sites were open to the landscape. This was not naivety, but a declaration of a different kind of power, one rooted in economic and spiritual dominance. Scholars believe the Minoans were a thalassocracy, a sea empire. Their power was projected not by armies marching over land, but by the graceful curves of their ships dominating the trade routes of the eastern Mediterranean. Their wealth came from commerce, from the export of exquisite pottery, saffron, and olive oil. Their security lay in the reach of their navy and the goodwill fostered by their cultural influence. Their art reinforces this, showcasing athletic games like bull leaping and peaceful processions, with almost no glorification of warfare. For centuries, this system thrived, making Crete the cultural heart of the Aegean. Then, around 3,600 years ago, the world literally shattered. The colossal volcanic eruption on the island of Thera, one of the largest in human history, sent tsunamis crashing against the northern shores of Crete and blanketed the island in ash. The disaster crippled the Minoan fleet, devastated coastal settlements, and likely caused a famine that shattered the delicate economic system. In this weakened state, they became vulnerable to a more martial people from the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans. These warriors, with their heavy fortifications and taste for gold, gradually infiltrated and then conquered Crete. The final blow to Minoan memory, however, was linguistic. The Minoans wrote in a script called Linear A, used for palace administration and likely for recording their history and religious texts. When the Mycenaeans took over, they adapted this script for their own Greek language, creating Linear B. The original Linear A fell into disuse and was forgotten. With it, we lost the key to the Minoan language, and with that key, we lost the names of every single priest king, the records of their reigns, their treaties, and their prayers. The vibrant frescoes show us their world, but the silence of their undeciphered script keeps their voices forever locked away, a peaceful sea kingdom swallowed by fire, wave, and the ink of its conquerors. The collapse of Minoan Crete created a power vacuum filled by a people of a very different character. Across the Aegean Sea, on the rocky mainland of Greece, the Mycenaeans built their power not on open palaces and maritime trade, but on towering fortifications and the point of a spear. Their citadels, like the legendary Mycenae with its massive lion gate, were statements of raw defensive strength. These were the palaces of the Homeric heroes, the kingdoms of Agamemnon and Nestor, a world of warriors, chariots, and epic poetry. And thanks to the Linear B tablets they left behind, we know the title of their supreme ruler, the Wanax. This was no mere chieftain. The Wanax, as recorded in the meticulous palace archives at Pylos and Knossos, was a figure of immense centralized authority. He controlled vast estates of land called Temenos, directly owned by the crown. He was the chief priest, overseeing a complex state religion. He commanded a detailed, hierarchical bureaucracy that tracked everything from bronze allotments for chariot wheels to the gifts sent to distant dignitaries. The palace was the absolute economic and religious heart of the kingdom, and the Wanax was its undisputed master. We know the names of their great centers: Mycenae, Pylos, Turin, Thebes. We can walk through their monumental tombs, the so-called treasury of Atreus, and marvel at the gold death masks that once covered the faces of these powerful kings. Yet, in a cruel twist of history, we know almost none of their actual names. The legendary Agamemnon, leader of the Greeks at Troy, remains just that, a legend woven by poets centuries after the palaces fell. The Linear B tablets are administrative inventories, not history books. They record the title Wanax, and in a few precious instances, they seem to refer to a specific individual, like a particular Wanax of Pylos. But his name, his lineage, his deeds are not written there. The dynasties of the Wanax are silent. Their detailed histories, their family trees, their chronicles of alliance and betrayal were likely recorded on perishable materials like parchment or wax tablets that turned to dust. The true end of their story is written not in words but in fire and ash. Around 3,200 years ago, the same cataclysmic wave of collapse that swept away the Hittites and challenged Egypt reached the shores of Greece. One by one, the great palatial centers were violently destroyed. The intricate bureaucracy that fed the Wanax power shattered overnight. With the palaces gone, the need for the complex Linear B script vanished. Literacy itself disappeared from Greece for centuries, plunging the land into a dark age. The Wanax, his scribes, his tax collectors, and his entire system of rule evaporated in the chaos. The memory of these kings survived only in the garbled, magnificent epic poems passed down orally, where their historical reality blurred into myth. We are left with the stark stones of their fortresses and the dry lists of their possessions, forever wondering about the faces behind the golden masks. The silence of the Mycenaean Wanax finds a powerful echo far to the south, along the winding Nile. Here, a dynasty of kings from a land the Egyptians once called wretched Kush did the unthinkable. They conquered their former masters and became pharaohs. This is the story of the kingdom of Kush's Napatan period, and the strange historical curtain that fell over its greatest rulers. For centuries, Kush had lived in Egypt's long shadow, a source of gold, slaves, and occasional rebellion. But when Egypt fractured into squabbling petty kingdoms during its third intermediate period, the rulers of Kush saw their moment. From their capital at Napata, near the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, a line of ambitious kings looked north. Their leader was Pi, a ruler of immense piety and military resolve. He did not see himself as an invader, but as a restorer. When he led his armies down the Nile, it was a holy crusade to reunite a divided Egypt and return it to the proper worship of the god Ammon. His victory stela, found at Jebel Barkal, is a masterpiece of historical propaganda. It recounts in exquisite detail how he besieged city after city, how the rival Egyptian princes surrendered, and how he made them bow before his horses as a sign of submission. Yet Pi, now pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt, did not stay. He received their tribute, installed loyal governors, and then, astonishingly, sailed back south to Napata to rule his new empire from his Kushite homeland. His successor, Taharqa, would become one of the most powerful rulers of this 25th dynasty. His reign was a golden age, with building projects from Napata to Thebes and a reputation that stretched across the ancient world. The Bible even mentions him as the king who marched out to fight the Assyrians, and there lies the turning point. The Assyrian Empire, with its iron weapons and relentless army, was a foe unlike any other. Taharqa fought them to a standstill for a time, but ultimately the Assyrian war machine proved too much. They pushed the Kushite pharaohs out of Egypt for good. This expulsion was a profound trauma. The Kushite kings retreated up the Nile back to their heartland. They took with them the titles and trappings of pharaohs, but the glorious chapter of ruling Egypt was closed. And here, the historical record for these once mighty rulers begins to fade. While in Egypt they had commissioned monuments and stelae in well-known hieroglyphics, back in Napata, the practice of detailed royal chronicles seems to diminish. The focus turned inward. Then, a few centuries later, the capital was moved even further south to Meroe. This relocation was more than a change of address, it was a cultural revolution. Meroe was rich in iron, and the kingdom grew powerful and independent. Most significantly, the scribes of Meroe developed their own unique script, now called Meroitic. It is a beautiful and sophisticated writing system with an alphabet that we can actually sound out. We can pronounce the words on their temple walls and funeral stelae. But we have no idea what most of them mean. The language remains undeciphered, a locked door without a key. This is the final, frustrating curtain that falls over the later Napatan kings and their successors in Meroe. We have their pyramids at Nuri and Meroe, smaller, steeper replicas of the Egyptian style. We have their names in cartouches. We can see their carved images offering to gods. But the Meroitic texts that accompany these monuments are silent histories. The detailed accounts of their reigns, their wars, their laws, and their dynastic quarrels are all trapped in plain sight. A king like Taharqa, who lived while Kush still used Egyptian, is known. But the kings who came 2 centuries later, who perhaps rallied the kingdom to new heights after the Egyptian defeat, are ghosts. Their stories are written in a language the modern world has yet to understand, making the later chapters of this conquering dynasty one of history's most eloquent silences. The frustration of a language we can pronounce but not understand finds a parallel in a civilization whose words we can read, but whose royal history has been deliberately overwritten. Before the marble glory of Rome, the hills of central Italy were home to a people of profound mystery and opulence, the Etruscans. To their eventual conquerors, the Romans, they were a source of both fascination and disdain, a sophisticated yet decadent culture from which they borrowed endlessly while plotting its erasure. The heart of Etruscan power lay with a figure known as the Lucumo. This title, passed down to us through Roman historians, seems to have denoted a ruler who combined the roles of king, high priest, and military leader. A Lucumo was not just a political authority, he was the spiritual conduit for his people, interpreting the will of the gods through the flight of birds and the patterns of lightning, practices the Romans would later adopt as their own. Our clearest window into the world of the Lucumons is not a chronicle but a tomb. The Rigolini Galassi tomb, discovered near Cerveteri, is a breathtaking time capsule. Buried around 2,600 years ago, it contained the remains of a noblewoman, possibly a princess or a queen, surrounded by a fortune that speaks of staggering wealth and far-reaching connections. She was adorned with golden fibulae, intricate bracelets, and a pectoral of breathtaking craftsmanship. Beside her lay a chariot, bronze cauldrons, and silver vessels imported from as far away as Egypt and the Near East. This was not merely a grave, it was a statement of dynastic power, a declaration that the family laid to rest here commanded trade routes, revered artisans, and held a sacred status in life and in death. The tomb shouts of a sophisticated, hierarchical society with a powerful elite, yet it whispers nothing of their names or their lineage. This silence is the direct result of history's winners writing the narrative. The Etruscans were not illiterate, far from it. They had a rich written tradition, using an alphabet derived from the Greeks to write their own unique, non-Indo-European language. Surviving examples show they used writing for everything from religious rituals to property markers to the labels on ornate pottery. They likely produced literature, historical records, and detailed lists of their Lucumons. But the Roman assimilation of Etruria was a slow, thorough, and ultimately suffocating process. As Rome grew in power, it absorbed Etruscan territory, granted its people citizenship, and gradually replaced the Etruscan language with Latin. Over generations, Etruscan ceased to be a living tongue. The final, devastating blow was cultural. the Roman elite, while privately admiring Etruscan art and adopting their religious rites, publicly framed them as a people of luxury and loose morals, a stereotype used to justify their own conquest. There was no great burning of libraries because the Etruscan written tradition likely faded from disuse and neglect. Scrolls of linen or wax tablets crumbled away, leaving only the short, formulaic inscriptions on tomb walls and durable artifacts. The Romans had no need to preserve the history of a people they had subsumed into their own glorious story. So the Lucumones, the kings who taught Rome about engineering, the augury, and the triumph, vanished. We see their power reflected in the gold of a tomb, and we hear distorted echoes of their lives in the biased accounts of Roman historians who saw them as a conquered people. Their dynasty is a ghost in the very foundation of Western civilization, its voice silenced by the overwhelming success of its greatest student. That gold-laden Etruscan tomb speaks of a society obsessed with bloodline and status, a theme that found its most rigid expression far to the east. In the verdant valleys of the Korean peninsula, the Silla kingdom perfected a system of aristocracy so absolute it became a cage of bone. This was the golpum, or bone rank system, a social order that dictated every single aspect of a person's life from the moment of their birth, from the highest office they could hold to the size of their home and the color of their clothes. Your rank was not earned, it was inherited, determined by the purity of your lineage. At the very apex were the sacred bone, or seongol, ranks, reserved exclusively for those who could claim descent from the kingdom's mythical founders. These individuals alone were eligible to become king or queen. Just below them were the true bone, or jingol, aristocracy, who filled the high ministerial and military command. The system cascaded down through 6 rigid grades, with each rank granting specific privileges and imposing unbreakable limits. A man of the 6th rank, for instance, could never command troops, only serve in them. His house could not have a tiled roof, and his carriage, if he could afford one, would be of a strictly regulated size. This was a world where your ancestry was your destiny, carved in stone and enforced by law. The origins of this extraordinary system are wrapped in the same legendary mist that shrouds Silla's earliest kings. The foundation myth begins with Park Hyokgeos, a ruler said to have been born from a golden egg laid by a white horse and discovered by a chief in a forest. He was proclaimed king at the age of 13, unifying 6 clans and founding the Saro kingdom, which would become Silla. For generations, the early dynastic lists are filled with such symbolic narratives where kings marry goddesses and perform miraculous feats. These are not mere fairy tales, they are political tools designed to sanctify the bloodline of the ruling elite and justify the bone rank system's exclusivity. The problem for historians is that these mythic chronicles, compiled centuries later, blur the precise transitions of early power. The detailed, administrative history of how the first bone rank families consolidated their authority, the political marriages, the subtle usurpations, the slow codification of the golpum laws went largely unrecorded in contemporary detail. The system itself was the point, not the messy human process of building it. Why document the gritty rise of individual families when the eternal truth was that only certain bones were sacred? The focus was on legitimizing the present hierarchy by projecting it into a sacred, immemorial past. This creates a profound gap in our understanding. We know the system's rigid outcomes, but the founding dynastic maneuvers of the early Silla period remain ghostly. We see the impressive results, the eventual unification of much of Korea under Silla's banner, powered by an elite Hwarang warrior corps drawn from the upper bone ranks. Yet the specific kings and queens of the first few centuries, their personalities, their conflicts, their precise contributions beyond their mythical resumes are elusive. Their individual stories were subsumed by the overwhelming structure they created. They built a kingdom so focused on the purity of lineage that it forgot to write down the full human story of its own founding, leaving us with magnificent tombs, intricate gold crowns that denote rank, and a social blueprint of breathtaking strictness, but only whispers of the flesh and blood rulers who first wore those crowns. While Silla codified its aristocracy in bone, another empire wrote its laws on tablets of clay, only to see them shatter. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, the Hittites forged one of the Bronze Age's great superpowers, a kingdom that could stand toe-to-toe with Egypt. Their story begins not with a golden egg, but with a king who literally built his legacy from the ashes. His name was Hattusili I, and his first monumental act was to abandon the old royal city and establish a new capital atop a formidable rocky outcrop. He named it Hattusa after himself, a permanent stamp of his will upon the land. This was a ruler who understood the power of symbols and the necessity of iron resolve. The annals he left behind, written in the intricate cuneiform script borrowed from Mesopotamia, are not dry chronicles. They are vivid, first-person accounts of relentless campaigning. We hear his voice, frustrated and determined, as he puts down rebellions among his own kin, declaring that his own sons had become like venomous serpents. He pushed the borders of the nascent Hittite state outward through sheer force of personality and military innovation, most notably the use of the light, speedy chariot that would become a hallmark of their power. Hattusili was the architect, but it was his adopted grandson, Mursili I, who would deliver the dynasty's most stunning blow. While still a young man, Mursili embarked on an audacious military gamble that still echoes through history. He marched his army over 1,000 miles down the Euphrates River all the way to the heart of Mesopotamia. His target was the legendary city of Babylon itself. Against all odds, he succeeded. The Hittite army sacked Babylon, bringing the mighty dynasty of Hammurabi to a sudden, shocking end. This was not an act of permanent conquest, it was a raid of breathtaking scale, a statement to the entire ancient world that a new power had arrived. Mursili returned to Hattusa laden with plunder and immortal glory. And then, in a twist fit for a tragedy, he was almost immediately assassinated upon his return, a victim of palace intrigue that plunged the kingdom into instability. These two founders, Hattusili and Mursili, should be as famous as Ramesses or Hammurabi. We know their names and their greatest deeds only because the Hittites were meticulous record keepers. Their archives at Hattusa contain tens of thousands of clay tablets covering treaties, laws, religious rituals, and royal annals. Yet, this very wealth of information reveals a profound gap. The tablets from this formative Old Kingdom period are often heartbreakingly fragmentary. Many were recycled, used as building filler in later constructions, or simply broken by the collapse of the palace roofs that protected them. While we have the climax of their stories, the detailed texture of their reigns, the court politics, the succession struggles, the full scope of their earliest dynasty remains full of holes. We see the silhouette of a mighty tree, but many of its deepest roots are missing. This fragmentation became a total severance when the end came. Around 1200 BCE, the same calamitous wave that toppled empires across the Mediterranean crashed upon the high walls of Hattusa. The capital was not merely conquered, it was systematically abandoned. The population vanished, the gates were left open. For centuries, the city sat empty, its libraries of clay tablets buried under collapsed mudbrick and slowly eroding soil. The continuity of Hittite history was completely broken. When the Assyrians later passed through the region, they encountered the descendants of the Hittites in small city-states, but the memory of the great empire and the full lineage of its founding kings had faded into local legend. The archives waited in silence for 3,000 years, leaving the story of its architects tantalizingly incomplete. The clay tablets of Hattusa held their secrets for millennia, but some civilizations wrote their history on a material destined to vanish. Upon the shores of the eastern Mediterranean, a people emerged whose power was measured not in land but in the horizon. These were the Phoenicians, the master seafarers whose purple-dyed textiles gave them their name and whose ships became the arteries of the ancient world. Their great city-states Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos were not unified under a single emperor, but were each independent kingdoms ruled by their own hereditary lines of merchant kings. We know one of these rulers quite well, yet we do not know him from his own people. Hiram I, king of Tyre, is a celebrated figure in the Hebrew Bible, remembered for his long friendship with King David and his son Solomon. The text describes how he supplied the famed cedar wood of Lebanon, along with skilled craftsmen and gold, to build the Grand Temple in Jerusalem. This was not charity, it was high-stakes diplomacy and commerce, a deal between two monarchs that cemented an alliance for generations. Hiram's story suggests a ruler of immense wealth, influence, and political savvy, the head of a maritime dynasty that could bankroll an empire's most sacred project. Yet, if we search for King Hiram in his own homeland for a royal inscription boasting of this achievement, we find almost nothing. This silence is the defining mystery of Phoenician royalty. Unlike the Egyptians who carved their triumphs on temple walls, or the Assyrians who lined their palaces with boastful reliefs, the Phoenician kings seem to have had little interest in stone propaganda. Their records were transactional and practical, written on papyrus scrolls and wax tablets, perfect for ship manifests, trade contracts, and diplomatic correspondence, but tragically ephemeral. In the humid coastal climate of the Levant, these organic materials rotted away to nothing. What remains are brief inscriptions on stone, often just dedications on temple foundations or simple tombstones, giving a name and a title but no narrative. Consequently, the intricate dynastic politics of Tyre or Sidon, the palace intrigues, the succession crises, the very personalities of these powerful kings are lost to us. Their history is told almost entirely through the biased lens of others, through the accounts of their Egyptian overlords, their Assyrian conquerors, their Greek rivals, and their Hebrew partners. We see them as the Bible's wealthy allies, as the Assyrian annals' stubborn tributaries, or as the Greek poets' cunning traders. We know they had kings, but the internal heartbeat of their royal houses, the stories that would explain how a Hiram came to power and held it, are silent. Their legacy was not in carved conquests, but in the alphabet they perfected and spread across the Mediterranean, a gift that would outlast every one of their forgotten dynasties. The Phoenicians left their history on scrolls that turned to dust, but some dynasties wrote their legacy in gold upon the frozen earth. North of the Black Sea, on the vast, wind-swept Eurasian steppe, the Scythians ruled a nomadic empire of terrifying prowess. To the settled civilizations of Greece and Persia, they were the ultimate barbarians, horse archers who drank wine from the skulls of their enemies and seemed to live in perpetual motion. Yet the Greek historian Herodotus, ever curious, recorded fascinating details about their royal clans. He wrote of kings who commanded absolute loyalty and of elaborate funeral rites that lasted 40 days, culminating in the construction of a massive burial mound, a kurgan. Inside, the king would be laid to rest with a concubine, his servants, his finest horses, and staggering quantities of gold artwork. For centuries, these accounts were seen as the exaggerated tales of a distant people. Then archaeologists began to open the kurgans. What they found was not exaggeration, but a reality more opulent and complex than Herodotus could have known. The frozen tombs of the Pazyryk culture in the Altai Mountains, preserved in permafrost, are time capsules of breathtaking detail. They revealed chieftains with elaborate animal-style tattoos still visible on their skin, buried alongside felt wall hangings, ornate carpets, and entire chariots. These were not the graves of simple tribal leaders, but of a highly stratified aristocracy with access to luxury, goods from China to the Mediterranean. The gold alone is staggering, intricate pectorals, combative stags, and delicate appliques that adorned their clothing, all speaking of master craftsmen and immense concentrated wealth. This material splendor screams of a powerful, organized political structure with a clear hierarchy culminating in a paramount king. Yet here lies the central paradox of the Scythians. They built an empire that stretched for thousands of miles, traded with the great powers of their day, and developed a stunning artistic tradition, but they never felt the need to write their own story down. As a confederation of nomadic tribes, their history, laws, and lineage were preserved orally through epic poems and songs recited around campfires. When those voices fell silent, the knowledge vanished. We know the names of a few Scythian kings only because they appear as enemies or allies in Persian and Greek records, figures like Idantheus, who defied the Persian emperor Darius the Great. But the internal dynastic chronicles, the lists of succession, the tales of how one royal clan rose above the others, the very names of the tattooed chieftains found in the Pazyryk kurgans are forever lost. Their magnificent gold is a silent testament to power, but it cannot tell us who these kings truly were or how their ghostly dynasties governed the endless sea of grass. Gold speaks of kings, but religion writes their legacy in a different script. Before the mighty Mauryan Empire unified much of the Indian subcontinent under the rule of Chandragupta Maurya, the political landscape was a vibrant, fractured mosaic of competing states known as the Mahajanapadas, the Great Realms. These were not mere tribal territories, but sophisticated kingdoms with defined capitals, standing armies, and complex economies. And at the heart of the most powerful of these realms, Magadha, lies a ghostly dynasty that laid the groundwork for all future Indian empires, the Haryankas. Our window into their world is not a palace archive or a set of royal edicts, but a collection of spiritual texts, the primary sources for kings like Bimbisara and his son Ajatashatru are the sacred literature of Buddhism and Jainism. These are not historical chronicles, they are religious scriptures where the kings of Magadha appear as supporting characters in the larger drama of the Buddha's life or the spiritual conquests of Jain Tirthankaras. King Bimbisara, for instance, is remembered fondly in Buddhist texts as an early and devoted patron of the Buddha. He is depicted as a wise and compassionate ruler who donated a bamboo grove near his capital of Rajagriha to the monastic community, a place that became one of the Buddha's favorite retreats. The texts tell us he expanded Magadha's power through diplomacy and marriage alliances, and that he met a tragic end, imprisoned and possibly murdered by his own ambitious son, Ajatashatru. Ajatashatru, in turn, is a far more complex figure in these narratives. He is the conflicted king, racked with guilt after patricide, who seeks solace from the Buddha. He is also the fierce warrior king who conquers the neighboring republic of the Vajis, using cunning and siege engines to breach their walls. These stories are rich with human drama and political insight, but they are filtered through a singular purpose: to illustrate moral and spiritual truths. The king's policies are discussed only as they relate to the religious community. Their precise dates of reign are vague, synchronized with the lifespan of the Buddha rather than a fixed calendar. The messy details of taxation, administration, and dynastic succession are glossed over in favor of parables about karma, duty, and enlightenment. This creates a profound historical haze. We know Magadha, under the Haryankas, began its meteoric rise to dominance, absorbing rival kingdoms and controlling lucrative trade routes. We can infer that Bimbisara was a brilliant political strategist and that Ajatashatru was a military innovator. But we have no royal inscriptions from their time declaring their victories. We have no secular court poetry celebrating their lineage. The Haryanka dynasty exists in a twilight zone between verified history and religious myth. Their capital city of Rajagriha, with its massive cyclopean walls still visible today, stands as a silent stone testament to their power, yet it offers no names or dates. The dynasty's true origins, the full list of its kings, the internal coups, and the economic policies that fueled its expansion are all obscured. They are remembered not as sovereigns who built an empire, but as souls who interacted with saints, their earthly authority forever framed by a spiritual context they could never have anticipated. They are the ghostly architects of an imperial tradition, their political brilliance preserved only in the reflected light of a religious awakening. The spiritual chronicles of Magadha preserved kings as patrons, but in the deserts of southern Jordan, an entire dynasty carved its legacy directly into the living rock. The Nabateans were not just kings, they were hydrological geniuses and mercantile masters who built their wealth not on fertile land, but on controlling the desert's most precious resource, water. Their capital, Petra, is a monument to this brilliance, a city of breathtaking facades like the treasury and the monastery, hewn from rose-red sandstone cliffs. These were not mere tombs, but statements of power and piety for a ruling elite who commanded the incense trade. Frankincense and myrrh, sacred resins worth their weight in gold, traveled on camel caravans from southern Arabia to the markets of the Mediterranean, and the Nabateans controlled every well and way station along the route. We know the name of their greatest king from an unexpected source, the New Testament. King Aretas IV, called Aretas Philodmus, the one who loves his people, ruled for nearly 5 decades at the height of Nabatean prosperity. It was his ethnarch or governor in Damascus who tried to arrest the Apostle Paul, as mentioned in the second letter to the Corinthians. This biblical footnote confirms a king of significant regional power whose influence stretched far beyond his desert capital. Yet, for a civilization so visibly magnificent, the Nabatean royal house is shrouded in frustrating silence. We have a list of kings' names recovered from a handful of inscriptions and coins and from the accounts of their Greek and Roman neighbors. We know of Obodas I and Malachus II and the formidable Queen Shakelath, but these names are like isolated peaks in a sandstorm. The detailed topography of their reigns, the family intrigues, the specific treaties and succession crises are almost entirely lost. The reason is one we've encountered before, but with a cruel desert twist. The Nabateans developed their own cursive script, a flowing Aramaic derivative, and they were clearly a literate administration. They must have kept extensive records, trade contracts, tax rolls, diplomatic correspondence, and royal decrees. But in the dry, scorching climate of their realm, they logically wrote on the most available perishable materials, papyrus scrolls and leather parchment. These documents, which would have held the true narrative of their dynasty, have completely disintegrated over the centuries, leaving only the rare inscription on stone or metal. Our understanding is therefore a patchwork stitched together from the outside observations of Roman historians like Strabo, from the archaeological study of Petra's monumental buildings and ingenious water conduit systems, and from the silent testimony of their coinage. The final act of their story is recorded by Rome. In the year 106 of the Common Era, the Roman Emperor Trajan formally annexed the Nabatean kingdom, transforming it into the province of Arabia Petrea. This was not necessarily a violent conquest, but a quiet, diplomatic absorption. The last Nabatean king, Rabel II, had died and Rome simply stepped in. This peaceful transition, while sparing the city, effectively erased the political identity of the Nabatean monarchy overnight, the royal court dissolved. The need for Nabatean scribes and their perishable archives vanished. The dynasty's final years, the circumstances surrounding Rabel's death, and any internal struggles for the throne in the face of Roman pressure faded into the desert air. We are left with the stunning, silent stone city, a testament to a line of kings who mastered the art of desert survival and built an empire on scent and sand, but who took the intimate story of their rule with them when the last caravan moved on. Petra's rock-hewn splendor speaks of a kingdom built on trade, but no trade route was more transformative than the Silk Road, and at its very heart for nearly 3 centuries sat an empire whose name should be as famous as Rome or Han China, the Kushan Empire. Emerging from the chaos that followed the collapse of the earlier Greco-Bactrian kingdoms, the Kushans became the essential middlemen of the ancient world. Their territory was the ultimate crossroads, stretching from what is now Tajikistan down through Afghanistan and into the northern plains of the Indian subcontinent. A caravan from Rome carrying glass and gold could meet a train of camels from China laden with silk and lacquerware, all under the watchful eyes of Kushan officials who taxed the goods and guaranteed safe passage. This was not just an economic empire, it was a cultural melting pot of breathtaking diversity, where Greek, Persian, Indian, and Chinese influences fused into something entirely new. And we know the name of its most illustrious ruler, the great Emperor Kanishka. His reign was a golden age. He convened a major Buddhist council that helped shape the direction of Mahayana Buddhism, patronized scholars and artists, and built monumental stupas, one of which in Peshawar was said to have been so tall it cast a shadow for miles. His coins are miniature masterpieces, depicting a pantheon of deities from Greek Heracles to Persian Mithra to the Buddha himself, a visual testament to the empire's cosmopolitan spirit. Yet, for all this glory, the origins of the Kushan kings are shrouded in a fog that rolls off the Central Asian steppe. Who were these people before they became emperors? Most scholars trace their roots to a nomadic confederation known to Chinese chroniclers as the Yuezhi. According to these records, the Yuezhi were originally based in what is now Western China, but were violently driven out by a rival group, the Xiongnu, around the 2nd century before the Common Era. This defeat triggered a long, slow migration westward, a domino effect of displacement that eventually pushed them into Bactria, the land of 1,000 cities. Here, among the ruins of Greek colonial kingdoms, the Yuezhi settled, divided into 5 tribes, and one of these tribes, the Kushans, gradually subdued the others. The transition from nomadic chieftains to Silk Road emperors is the great unsolved chapter of their story. The problem is one of sources and script. While the later Kushan emperors issued mountains of coins and left inscriptions across their realm, their early dynastic chronology is a tangled knot historians are still trying to unravel. The sequence of early kings, their exact relationships, and the dates of their reigns are hotly debated, pieced together from coin typology and scattered references in other cultures' records. Even more challenging is their language. Many of their most important royal inscriptions are written in the Bactrian language using a modified Greek alphabet. While we can read the letters, the language itself is only partially understood, a linguistic cousin to modern Pashto and Pamiri languages that still holds onto its secrets. So a pillar erected by a king listing his ancestors or his conquests might be perfectly legible in terms of its characters, but the specific meanings, the nuances of titles, and the precise historical events can remain just out of reach. This creates a ghostly prologue to Kanishka's splendid reign. We see the magnificent result, an empire that connected continents, but the gritty foundational story of the dynasty's 1st century, the battles that unified the tribes, the name of the chieftain who first declared himself King of Kings, the political marriages that secured their power, is trapped in the half-light of a script we can read but not fully comprehend. The Kushans stand as majestic, half-remembered pivots of the ancient world, their early lineage fading into the same dusty trails their caravans once traveled. The Kushans connected continents, but another empire stood as Rome's equal on a different continent entirely. In the highlands of northern Ethiopia, the kingdom of Aksum rose to become one of the ancient world's great powers, a realm of such wealth and ambition that its kings, the Neguses, minted coins that circulated from Alexandria to India. Their capital was marked by towering stone obelisks or stelae, the tallest of which stood over 100 feet high, hewn from single blocks of granite and intricately carved to resemble multi-story palaces. These were not just monuments, they were declarations proclaiming the authority of a dynasty that controlled the lucrative trade between the Roman world and the Indian Ocean. Aksumite ships patrolled the Red Sea, their merchants dealing in ivory, gold, exotic animals, and frankincense. They even launched a military expedition across the Red Sea to conquer parts of southern Arabia. This was a sophisticated, literate Christian kingdom that corresponded with emperors in Constantinople. Yet, for all its later glory, the origins of the Aksumite dynasty are buried in a profound silence. Later Ethiopian tradition, recorded in the epic Kebra Nagast, provides long, legendary king lists tracing the Neguses back to the biblical union of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. These stories are foundational to Ethiopian identity, but they are sacred history, not verifiable chronicle. The hard archaeological evidence for the earliest Aksumite rulers, those who built the first stelae and consolidated the highlands into an empire in the centuries before their conversion to Christianity in the 4th century, is frustratingly sparse. Inscriptions from this foundational period are rare and brief. We have names like Indubis and Aphilas from early coinage, but these coins tell us nothing of their wars, their laws, or their lineage. The precise political maneuvers that allowed one ruling family to dominate the competing chiefdoms of the region, to control the vital port of Adulis, and to establish the administrative machinery of a state are almost entirely lost. How did the first Negus secure the loyalty of the highland clans? What conflicts forged the Aksumite state? The monumental stelae stand as silent witnesses to power, but they are tombstones without biographies, their accompanying inscriptions weathered away or never written at all. The dynasty's foundational century is a historical enigma, a powerful ghost obscured by the very brilliance of its later Christian incarnation. While Aksum's origins faded into legend, a far more violent mystery was taking shape on the Central Asian steppes. The Hephthalites, known to their terrified enemies as the White Huns, were a storm of conquest that seemed to appear from nowhere. In the 5th and 6th centuries of the Common Era, they exploded onto the historical stage, striking simultaneous, devastating blows against the two great empires of the age. To the west, they humbled the mighty Sasanian Persians, killing a king in battle and forcing his successors to pay them tribute. To the southeast, they crashed into the Gupta Empire of India, shattering its golden age of peace and art and carving out a vast dominion of their own. They were the nightmare of settled civilization, a nomadic confederation of terrifying military prowess. Their armies combined the lightning speed of horse archers with the brutal shock power of heavy lancers, a tactical system that overwhelmed traditional forces. Their very appearance was designed to intimidate, with sources describing them as practicing artificial cranial deformation, binding the heads of their infants to create elongated, towering skulls that made them look otherworldly in battle. Yet, for all the fear they inspired and the empires they broke, the Hephthalites themselves remain one of history's most contentious ghosts. The core of the mystery is not what they did, but who they were. Their ethnic and linguistic identity is a puzzle that historians and archaeologists still fight over today. Were they a Turkic people related to the later waves of steppe conquerors? Were they an Iranic group, perhaps distant cousins of the Persians they fought? Or were they something else entirely, a unique ethnic fusion born from the chaos of the migrating tribes? The debate rages because the Hephthalites left almost no written records of their own. What we know of them comes exclusively from the hostile, often hysterical accounts of their enemies. Byzantine, Persian, and Chinese chroniclers describe their cruelty, their strange customs, and their military might, but they offer little clear insight into the Hephthalites' own view of the world. These sources cannot even agree on what to call them, using a confusing array of names. This external noise makes it nearly impossible to hear the Hephthalites' own voice. Without their own chronicles, we have no king lists, no dynastic marriages, no royal decrees. The ruling structure of their coggons, their supreme leaders, is a blur. We catch glimpses of powerful figures like the Koghan who defeated the Sasanians, but we do not know his name, his lineage, or how power passed from one ruler to the next. Their state appears to have been a complex multi-ethnic empire, ruling over cities and trade routes, not just empty steppe. They minted coins imitating Sasanian designs, suggesting a sophisticated administration. But the internal machinery of their dynasty is invisible to us. Their end was as decisive as their rise. In the middle of the 6th century, a coalition of their enemies, the Sasanians, and a new power from the north, the Gokturks, finally crushed them. The Hephthalite confederation shattered. Some groups were absorbed by the victors, others fled and dispersed. With that political collapse, the last threads of their royal lineage dissolved completely. There was no successor state to preserve their history, no court poets to mourn their fallen khans. They vanished back into the landscape from which they came, leaving behind a legacy of destruction, a handful of coins, and a skull-shaping custom that chills the blood, but not a single line of their own story. They are the perfect example of a ghost dynasty, a terrifying power whose internal reality is forever hidden behind the fearful descriptions of those who barely survived them. Silence can be a form of power, a strategic choice made by those who control the world's most vital crossroads. This was the domain of the Srivijayan Maharajas, the shadow lords of the spice trade. From their river-mouth capital in the sweltering jungles of Sumatra, they commanded an empire with no borders, only horizons. For over 6 centuries, they did not need to conquer vast territories. They needed only to command the sea lanes, especially the narrow, treacherous Strait of Malacca. Any ship sailing between China and India, laden with silks, spices, and porcelain, had to pass through this maritime choke point. The Srivijayan kings understood that controlling this passage was more valuable than any stretch of farmland. They built a thalassocracy, a realm of water, where their power was projected not by armies marching over land, but by the swift outrigger canoes of their navy, which could appear from hidden river estuaries to escort, tax, or confiscate the cargo of any merchant vessel. Their wealth was legendary, built on the taxes of safe passage and the bustling port markets they fostered. They were also fervent patrons of Mahayana Buddhism, transforming their capital into a great center of learning that attracted pilgrims and scholars from across Asia, helping to spread Buddhist art and thought throughout Southeast Asia. Yet, for an empire of such reach and duration, the Srivijayan Maharajas are astonishingly quiet in their own voice. We know of their splendor almost entirely through the awestruck reports of others. Chinese Buddhist monks like the pilgrim Yijing wrote detailed accounts of studying there in the 7th century, describing a bustling, pious kingdom. Arab geographers of the 9th and 10th centuries marveled at the king's wealth, noting he possessed a basin made of a single giant ruby to wash his face. These foreign sources paint a vivid picture, but they are viewing the empire from the outside as visitors or trading partners. The indigenous historical record is a different story. What little survives from Srivijaya itself are stone inscriptions, but these are not chronicles of kings and conquests. They are ritualistic texts often written in Old Malay and sprinkled with Sanskrit that curse oath breakers and dedicate the merit of good deeds to the king and his subjects. One famous inscription from the late 7th century begins with the exultant cry, "Hail, success," and proceeds to list a series of spiritual curses upon anyone who dares rebel against the local ruler. It is a powerful document, but it tells us nothing of the king's lineage, his naval policies, or his diplomatic treaties. This creates a profound historical irony. We can map Srivijaya's vast economic and cultural influence across the region. We can see the Buddhist statues and temple foundations that bear its stylistic stamp, but the dynasty itself is a lineup of ghosts. The names and sequences of the early Maharajas are a puzzle reconstructed from brief mentions on those cursed stones and the scattered notes of foreign observers. The precise mechanics of their control are inferred. Did they maintain a permanent navy, or was it a fleet summoned from loyal port city allies? How exactly did they enforce their tariffs on the open sea? The answers are lost to the humid tropical climate that rotted their wooden palaces, their ships, and any palm leaf manuscripts or parchment scrolls on which they might have kept their royal annals. The Srivijayan kings mastered the art of controlling the world's trade, but they left the story of their own rule to be written by the merchants who passed through their waters, leaving us with the echo of their power and the silence of their court. The Aztecs gazed back in awe at a golden age they called Tolan, a time of perfect artisans and wise rulers. This was the world of the Toltecs, the civilization against which all others were measured. For the Aztecs, the word Toltec became synonymous with artist, with master craftsman, with the very ideal of civilized life. At the heart of this revered history stood a ruler of almost messianic stature, Seacatl Topiltzin Quetzalcoatl. His name is a tapestry of meaning, Seacatl for the calendar day of his birth, Topiltzin meaning our prince, and Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent, the god of wind, wisdom, and the morning star. He was described as a priest-king of profound piety who banned human sacrifice, favoring instead the offering of snakes, butterflies, and flowers. His reign was said to be a time of miraculous abundance, where cotton grew in vibrant colors and corn cobs were as large as a man. Yet his story ends in tragedy and exile. Driven from his throne by dark forces aligned with the warlike god Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, Quetzalcoatl departed eastward across the sea on a raft of serpents, promising one day to return. This powerful myth was not mere folklore for the Aztecs, it was political bedrock, a way to legitimize their own rule by claiming descent from the glorious Toltecs. But when archaeologists went looking for the historical truth behind this legend, they found a profound and frustrating gap. The great city of Tolan was almost certainly the site we know as Chala in the Mexican state of Hidalgo. And Chala was indeed a major post-classic capital, flourishing between the 10th and 12th centuries. Its grand plaza is guarded by massive, stoic stone warriors, and a carved pillar shows a procession of rulers, undeniable evidence of a powerful elite, the Tlahtoni. The architecture and art show a clear blend of influences from the distant Maya to the mighty Teotihuacan, suggesting a cosmopolitan center of real political and cultural weight. The problem is one of direct connection. While we have the city and we have the glorious myth, linking the two with a verifiable dynastic list is nearly impossible. The stone warriors do not bear the name Quetzalcoatl. The carvings do not spell out the story of a civil war between priestly and martial factions. The historical reality of a Toltec empire with a clear sequence of kings leading up to the exile of Topiltzin dissolves under scrutiny. This blurring is largely the work of the Aztecs themselves, who lived centuries after Chala's fall. They retroactively magnified the Toltec legacy, weaving historical figures into divine narratives to serve their own purposes. A possibly historical ruler of Chala became fused with the ancient god Quetzalcoatl. The city's actual decline, which may have been due to drought, internal strife, or invasion, was recast as a single mythic event of a good king's betrayal and departure. This created a feedback loop where legend informs archaeology and archaeology searches for legend. So what are we left with? We have a powerful city-state that clearly exerted influence across Mesoamerica, spreading a distinctive artistic style and the cult of the feathered serpent. We have a dynasty, or likely several dynasties, of rulers who commanded the labor to build Chala's pyramids and carve its giants. But their individual names, their specific deeds, and the true nature of their political domain are caught in the twilight between verifiable history and brilliant, self-serving propaganda. The Toltec Tlahtoni are ghost kings, their true faces forever hidden behind the gleaming mask of the plumed serpent, crafted by the very people who longed to be their heirs. The legend of a god-king's return across the sea finds its counterpart in a civilization that would build its own heaven on earth, but whose earliest architects are nameless. Long before the jungle was pierced by the sublime towers of Angkor Wat, the lands we call Cambodia were a patchwork of dynamic, ambitious states. Chinese imperial annals written by diplomats and traders give us our first glimpses into this world. They speak of a coastal kingdom called Funan, a name likely derived from the ancient Khmer word for mountain. These records describe a bustling maritime power, a place of walled cities, extensive canals, and a people skilled in navigation and agriculture. They mention kings who sent exotic gifts like a live rhinoceros to the Chinese court. Later, the focus shifts inland to a constellation of rival states the Chinese grouped under the name Chenla. These were more militaristic, land-based powers, often at war with each other. From these fragments, a picture emerges of a sophisticated political landscape evolving for centuries before the Angkorian Golden Age. Yet, if we turn away from the Chinese observers and look for the voices of these kingdoms themselves, we are met with a wall of silence. The great historical void for the Khmer lies in the centuries before the year 800 of the Common Era. This is the pre-Angkorian period, and it is a realm of ghosts. The stunning achievement of later Khmer kings was their prolific use of stone inscriptions, detailing their genealogies, their conquests, and their temple foundations in both Sanskrit and Old Khmer. But this tradition only truly begins with the founding of the Angkorian Empire. For the preceding centuries, the rulers of Funan and Chenla did not or could not leave such permanent markers. What few inscriptions exist from this early time are brief, enigmatic, and rare. This leaves the dynastic lines that connected these early kingdoms to the later empire shrouded in profound mystery. We know a unified, powerful Khmer state eventually emerged under Jayavarman II in the early 9th century, a king who famously declared himself a universal monarch, a god-king, in a ritual on a sacred mountain. But who was he before that moment? His own inscriptions, written later, claim a mythical descent from the union of a hermit and a princess of the ocean, a cosmic origin story that deliberately overshadows his earthly pedigree. The historical kings who must have preceded him, the chiefs who consolidated power, the warlords who won the wars of Chenla, are absent from the record. The political landscape appears not as a clear, linear dynasty, but as a turbulent network of competing chiefdoms, shifting alliances, and small, regional kingdoms, perhaps unified only intermittently by a particularly strong ruler. The transition from this fragmented world to the monolithic empire of Angkor is one of Southeast Asia's greatest unrecorded stories. It is as if the Khmer, upon achieving their monumental vision at Angkor, chose to build their history only from that point forward, allowing the foundational centuries, the names and struggles of the true founders, to dissolve back into the fertile soil from which their greatness grew. The silence of the Khmer jungle gives way to the profound stillness of a desert canyon. In the high mesas of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloan people, often called the Anasazi, built a civilization of breathtaking ingenuity against a stark and demanding landscape. Their greatest achievements are not written on stone, but woven into the very rock itself. At places like Choco Canyon, they constructed monumental great houses, sprawling multi-story complexes with hundreds of rooms, precise astronomical alignments, and sophisticated masonry that required generations of coordinated labor. These were not mere villages, they were ceremonial and economic centers connected by a vast network of arrow-straight roads, some 30 feet wide, that cut across the desert for miles, linking outlying communities to the canyon's heart. This scale of public works implies a powerful, centralized authority, a leadership capable of mobilizing labor, directing resources, and maintaining a far-reaching cultural network. Yet, when we ask who these leaders were, the canyon walls offer only echoes. As a non-literate society, the ancestral Puebloans left no royal decrees, no lists of kings, no treaties or tax records. The nature of their rule is one of archaeology's most compelling puzzles. Did a single, powerful chieftain command the construction of Pueblo Bonito? Or was authority held by a council of clan elders, each representing a lineage? Perhaps power was spiritual, vested in a priestly class that orchestrated ceremonies tied to the solar and lunar cycles marked so precisely in the architecture. The great kivas, the large, circular, subterranean chambers found at these sites, suggest spaces for communal ritual that could have doubled as chambers of governance, where decisions were made not by edict but through consensus and spiritual guidance. The artifacts found within offer tantalizing but ambiguous clues. Exotic items like macaw feathers from Mesoamerica and shells from the Pacific coast point to long-distance trade networks that must have been managed by someone. Yet, burials show little evidence of extravagant wealth hoarding by individuals. There are no tombs filled with gold, no singularly opulent graves. This suggests a leadership that derived its authority from collective benefit and sacred duty rather than personal accumulation. Then, in the 13th century, this intricate world underwent a dramatic transformation. The great houses were systematically abandoned. The people left the canyon centers and dispersed, moving to new settlements, often in more defensible cliffside locations like those at Mesa Verde. The reasons were likely a complex web of pressures, a prolonged drought that strained agricultural resources, perhaps social tensions, or even external threats. With this migration and cultural shift, the specific identities of those who designed the roads, who aligned the walls with the solstice sun, and who presided over the great kivas were lost. Their names and titles dissolved into the collective memory of the clans, leaving behind only the silent, majestic architecture as a testament to a sophisticated society that mastered its environment, but whose rulers remain as anonymous as the wind that now whispers through their empty doorways. The silent stone cities of the ancestral Pueblones find a powerful echo across the Atlantic in the rolling hills of southern Africa. Here, a civilization built its capital not from adobe, but from granite, crafting a city so imposing that later European explorers refused to believe Africans could have built it. This is Great Zimbabwe, the heart of a kingdom that thrived on the wealth of the earth itself. The massive curvilinear walls, some over 30 feet high and 15 feet thick, were constructed without mortar, the stones so precisely fitted they have endured for nearly 1,000 years. Within these enclosures stood a society of immense sophistication, ruled by kings known as Mambos. The word itself, Mambo, means owner of the world, a title that speaks of absolute authority and divine connection. These rulers commanded the trade routes that funneled gold, ivory, and copper from the African interior to the bustling ports of the Swahili coast, where Arab and Persian merchants waited. The very scale of the stonework is a declaration of power, a permanent statement that required the coordinated labor of thousands, directed by a central, unquestioned authority for generations. Yet, if you walk among those towering walls today, you will find no royal inscriptions, no carved portraits of the Mambos, no stone chronicles listing their victories. The history of the kingdom during its zenith, from the 11th to the 15th centuries, is written in architecture, not in words. The Shona people who built it were a non-literate society in the traditional sense, meaning they did not use a written script for record-keeping. Their history, their laws, and the lineage of their kings were preserved in a living, breathing library, the oral tradition. Skilled storytellers, the griots of their culture, would memorize and recite the genealogies of the Mambos, the great deeds of past rulers, the stories of migration and conquest. This was a sophisticated historical system, but it was one vulnerable to the passage of time and the shock of disruption. Our only written glimpses from the period come from outsiders, primarily Portuguese traders who arrived on the coast centuries after Great Zimbabwe's peak. They recorded fragments of stories, tales of a powerful inland kingdom rich in gold, ruled by a great lord. But these are second-hand accounts, filtered through translation and often laden with the biases of merchants seeking treasure. They tell us the kingdom existed, but they cannot tell us the intimate story of its court. Who was the Mambo who first conceived of building in stone on such a monumental scale? Which king secured the most lucrative gold trade agreement with the coast? How did power pass from one ruler to the next, and what dynastic conflicts shaped the kingdom's destiny? The answers to these questions resided solely in the memories of the people, passed from elder to youth in a sacred chain of remembrance. The fading of this tradition is the true silence of great Zimbabwe. With the decline of the city as a political center, due possibly to environmental strain or shifting trade routes, the population dispersed, the royal court moved, and the concentrated cultural apparatus that maintained those precise oral histories fragmented. Later colonial regimes actively discouraged or misunderstood these traditions, accelerating the loss, so the granite walls stand as a magnificent but mute testament. We can see the evidence of centralized planning, of wealth, of a society complex enough to include astronomers who track the cycles of the moon and sun from a conical tower within the sacred enclosure. We can infer a dynasty of Mambos whose authority was as solid as the stones they stacked, but their names, their personalities, their specific contributions to the kingdom's golden age have retreated into the realm of legend, leaving the physical grandeur of their capital to speak for ghosts it can no longer name. Granite walls give way to earth shaped by human hands on a breathtaking scale. Across the river valleys of what is now the eastern United States, a different kind of monument rose not from stone but from the soil itself. This was the world of the Mississippian culture, a network of powerful chiefdoms that transformed the landscape between 800 and 500 years ago. Their greatest achievement was Cahokia, a sprawling metropolis that sat directly across the Mississippi River from present-day St. Louis. At its heart stood Monk's Mound, the largest prehistoric earthen structure in the Americas north of Mexico. This colossal platform, covering over 14 acres and rising 100 feet high, was not a tomb but a living foundation. Its flat sum, it was the stage for the residence of Cahokia's supreme ruler, a man who likely held the title of Great Sun. From this elevated perch, he would have looked out over a city of perhaps 20,000 people, a bustling urban center of thatched roof houses, vibrant plazas, and a grand ceremonial circle of towering wooden posts now called Woodhenge, used to track the solstices and equinoxes. The mound was a physical manifestation of a cosmic idea, a man-made mountain that lifted the ruler closer to the powers of the sky, separating him from the ordinary world below. He was not just a political leader, but a spiritual conduit, responsible for maintaining the balance between the upper world of the sun and stars, the middle world of humans, and the watery underworld. This sacred authority was reinforced by a stunning array of ritual objects, from finely crafted copper plates depicting the Birdman deity to delicate shell cups engraved with intricate patterns. These items spoke of a society with a complex shared religion and a ruling class that controlled access to exotic materials and sacred knowledge. Yet, for all this grandeur, the lords of Cahokia and the other great mound centers like Moundville and Spiro are utterly anonymous to us. The Mississippians left no written records, not even the cryptic glyphs of the Maya or the symbolic script of the Indus. Their history was recorded in the living memory of their people and in the stratified layers of the mounds themselves. Without writing, the specific names of the great sons, their dynastic lineages, their personal triumphs, and their bitter rivalries died with the last person who could recite their stories. We see the results of their power in the perfectly aligned plazas and the wealth of goods buried with elites, but we cannot attach a single human name to any of it. Their social structure was likely a delicate hierarchical pyramid, with the great sun at the apex, supported by a nobility of lesser chiefs and priests, all sustained by the labor of farmers who cultivated vast fields of maize, beans, and squash. This system, however, proved fragile. In the centuries before European contact, the great mound centers were one by one abandoned. Cahokia itself was largely empty by the 14th century. The reasons were a slow-motion catastrophe of intertwined pressures. Decades of favorable weather had allowed the population to boom, but a shift to cooler, wetter conditions could have devastated crop yields. Deforestation for building and fuel would have caused erosion and silted the rivers. social tensions, perhaps rebellions against the demanding elite or warfare with rival chiefdoms, likely intensified as resources dwindled. The entire political and spiritual framework, so dependent on the success of the great sun in ensuring prosperity, would have crumbled under sustained failure. As people dispersed into smaller, more mobile groups, the oral histories that preserved the names and deeds of the lords fragmented and were eventually lost. By the time European explorers and settlers marveled at the silent, grass-covered mounds, the civilizations that built them were already ghosts, their rulers remembered only in vague indigenous legends of a time when giants walked the earth and shaped the land. The mounds remain, silent earthen pyramids that hold the dust of kings whose names the wind long ago forgot. Even the most desolate desert can hide a kingdom of startling ingenuity. Far to the west of Egypt, in the very heart of the Sahara, the Garamantes built an urban civilization where logic said none could exist. Their domain was the Fezzan region of modern-day Libya, a landscape of scorching sand and rock. Their secret was not a river, but the hidden water trapped deep beneath the desert floor. To reach it, they engineered one of the ancient world's most remarkable systems, the Fagara. These were not simple wells, but underground tunnels, sometimes stretching for miles, gently sloped to guide groundwater by gravity to the surface oases. The construction was a monumental, generations-long effort, requiring the excavation of vertical shafts every 100 feet or so to remove debris and provide air. This hidden latticework of waterways turned the desert green, allowing the Garamantes to cultivate date palms, grapes, olives, and grains, sustaining a population that may have reached 100,000 people at its height. Their capital, Garama, was a city of mud brick and stone, a hub for caravans carrying gold, ivory, and slaves from sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean coast. To the Roman Empire, whose legions eventually pushed south into their territory, the Garamantes were not a myth but a formidable reality. Roman historians like Tacitus and Pliny the Elder wrote of them as fierce, mobile adversaries, desert raiders who could strike and vanish. They were a people to be fought, negotiated with, and ultimately contained. Yet, as with so many of our ghost dynasties, this outside perspective is all we have. The Garamantes themselves are silent. They almost certainly had a written language, likely using the Libico-Berber script found in rock inscriptions across the Sahara. But if they kept royal archives on papyrus, parchment, or wooden tablets, those materials have long since crumbled in the dry heat. The names of their kings, the sequence of their rule, the internal politics of their court are absent. Archaeology paints a picture of clear social hierarchy, with elite tombs containing imported Roman glass and jewelry, and simpler graves for the common folk. We can see the evidence of centralized power in the coordinated labor required for the Fagara and in the defensive forts that guarded their territory. But the human story is missing. We do not know which Garamantian king first masterminded the Fagara network, turning a scattering of oases into a kingdom. We cannot name the ruler who dared to challenge Rome's southern frontier, or the one who later made a fragile peace. Their diplomacy, their wars with neighboring tribes, the very extent of their sway over the trans-Saharan trade routes are known only through the fragmentary and often hostile reports from the other side of the desert. They built a civilization by defying the desert, only to have the sands of time erase the identities of the kings who commanded it. From the Sahara's hidden waters, we sail to an empire built on the open ocean. The vast Pacific was not a barrier for the people of Tonga, but a highway, and their rulers, the sacred Tai Tonga, were masters of the sea road. This was a maritime empire of a different kind, not held together by conquering armies, but by sacred kinship, intricate gift exchange, and awe-inspiring naval technology. The Tai Tonga line is perhaps the most enduring in Oceania, with oral traditions tracing an unbroken sacred lineage for nearly 1,000 years. At its heart is a founding myth of profound significance. The first Tai Tonga was not a mortal man, but the son of a union between a human woman and the sky god Tangaloa. His name was Ahoetu, and his story explains the very nature of Tongan kingship. As the legend goes, Ahoetu ascended to the sky to meet his divine father. His jealous half-brothers, the sons of Tangaloa, killed him, dismembered his body, and ate him. Their father, enraged, forced them to vomit up the pieces, which he then reassembled, bringing Ahoetu back to life. Restored and sanctified by this ordeal, Ahoetu returned to earth, not as a god, but as something new, a sacred king, a living bridge between the celestial and terrestrial worlds. His half-brothers were sent with him as his attendants, becoming the first chiefs of the major Tongan lineages. This myth established the Tai Tonga as divine, but it also embedded a crucial political concept that the king's authority was balanced by the power of the chiefly lineages who served him, the very ones who had once consumed him. This sacred status translated into real-world power that stretched across Polynesia. From their ceremonial capital at Lapaha on Tongatapu, the Tai Tonga commanded a network of influence that reached Fiji, Samoa, Rotuma, and parts of what is now French Polynesia. They did not rule through occupation, but through a sophisticated system of tributary relationships called the Matai system. Lesser chiefs from outlying islands would send their most valuable gifts, fine mats, carved whale ivory, and food staples to the Tai Tonga in elaborate ceremonies. In return, they received the ultimate currency of the ancient Pacific, prestige and legitimacy, sanctified by the king's divine touch. The king's navy, his kalia or great double-hulled voyaging canoes, were the engines of this influence. These were not simple boats, but colossal seagoing vessels, some over 100 feet long, capable of carrying hundreds of people and tons of cargo across thousands of miles of open ocean. They were the battleships and diplomatic envoys of their day, projecting the Tai Tonga's sacred authority across the blue continent. Yet, for a dynasty so central to Polynesian history, its early centuries are a beautiful and frustrating tapestry of myth and memory. The genealogies are long and precise, listing names and reigns, but they are oral histories recited by specialists and subject to the pressures of political change. The early names, from Ahoetu onward, are shrouded in the symbolic language of legend. Were the first 20 Tai Tonga historical figures, or are they mythological placeholders representing entire generations of consolidation? The precise political maneuvers, the wars of expansion, the diplomatic marriages that solidified this far-flung network are not recorded in any archive. They are embedded in chants, in family stories, and in the very landscape of tombs and stone trilithons. The monumental stone burial vaults, the langi, of the later Tai Tonga at Lapaha are real and tangible, hewn from colossal coral slabs. But the stories of the kings who built the empire that necessitated such grand tombs live in a realm where history and cosmology are inseparable, a dynasty remembered in the rhythm of waves and the recitation of ancestors. The gold of Great Zimbabwe had a direct ancestor, one buried on a lonely hilltop overlooking the meeting of two great rivers. Centuries before the stone walls rose, the kingdom of Mapungubwe flourished at the strategic confluence of the Limpopo and Shash, a place where trade routes from the African interior met trails leading to the Indian Ocean coast. This was Southern Africa's first verifiable state society, a complex kingdom with a clear social hierarchy and staggering wealth, all built on the trade of a single, mesmerizing commodity, gold. From around the 11th to the 13th centuries, Mapungubwe's artisans mastered the art of working this precious metal, creating delicate foil to cover wooden sculptures, crafting beads, and forming intricate jewelry. The kingdom's capital was a clear expression of power. At its base, in the valley, lived the common people in mud and thatch houses, but towering above them, separated by a near-vertical cliff face with only a few narrow, secret paths leading upward, was the sandstone plateau of Mapungubwe Hill. This was the exclusive domain of the sacred ruler and his elite. The spatial arrangement spoke a universal language of power. The king literally and symbolically elevated above his subjects, closer to the realm of the ancestors and the gods. It was a visual declaration that the ruler was not of the same world as those he governed. The most profound evidence of this sacred kingship came from the hilltop itself. Here, archaeologists uncovered royal graves. One, in particular, held the remains of a person of immense importance, buried in a seated position, the posture of a watchful chief or a revered ancestor. Scattered around this figure were artifacts of breathtaking opulence: a golden rhinoceros crafted from delicate foil over a wooden core, a golden bowl, and over 120 gold wire bangles. A scepter of pure gold lay nearby, perhaps the very symbol of office. This was not just a rich burial, it was a ritual statement, an attempt to translate earthly authority into eternal spiritual power using the most potent material known to them. Yet, for all this concrete evidence of a sovereign's presence, the grave is a silent tomb. We do not know if the seated figure was a man or a woman. We have no name, no title beyond what we infer. We cannot say if this was the founder of the dynasty or its last great ruler. As a pre-literate society, the people of Mapungubwe left no royal decrees scratched on stone, no lists of kings, no treaties with foreign merchants. Their history was held in the memories of their people, recited in oral traditions that have long since faded or transformed. The kingdom's decline, likely prompted by a shift in climate that made the area drier and less able to support a concentrated population, led to a southward migration. The elite, the keepers of the deepest histories, moved on, eventually contributing to the rise of Great Zimbabwe. In that transition, the specific identities of the Mapungubwe kings were lost, absorbed into the founding myths of new kingdoms. Today, the golden rhinoceros is a national treasure, a symbol of ancient African sophistication. But it is also a poignant reminder of a ghost dynasty, a line of powerful rulers who commanded trade, organized society, and were laid to rest with the sun's metal, yet who remain as anonymous as the wind that now sweeps across their abandoned hilltop sanctuary. The golden rhinoceros of Mapungubwe was a symbol of power anchored to a sacred hill, but the greatest power on the ancient steppe was anchored to nothing at all. It moved with the seasons, the herds, and the ambition of its supreme leaders, the Chanyas of the Xiongnu. This was the first great nomadic empire, a political and military force so formidable it forced the mighty Han dynasty of China to build walls, pay tribute, and fundamentally rethink its place in the world. The Xiongnu Confederation was a marvel of mobile statecraft, a vast union of pastoral tribes stretching across the grasslands north of China, from Manchuria to the Altai Mountains. At its head stood the Chanyu, a title that carried the weight of both a king and a high priest. His authority was absolute, drawn from a mandate of heaven as real and potent as that claimed by the Chinese emperor to the south. We know the name of their most brilliant founder, Madu Chanyu. According to Chinese chronicles, Madu was a figure of terrifying cunning and resolve. As a young prince, his father, the reigning Chanyu, sent him as a hostage to a rival tribe, the Yuezhi, and then deliberately attacked them, hoping the Yuezhi would kill his son. Madu escaped, stole a horse, and returned home. His father, impressed, gave him command of 10,000 horsemen. Madu used this force not to serve his father, but to train them in absolute, chilling obedience. He ordered them to shoot their arrows at his favorite horse, and those who hesitated were executed. Next, he ordered them to shoot at his favorite wife, and again, those who held back were killed. Finally, he ordered them to shoot at his father's horse, and this time every arrow flew true. Madu knew he had his weapon. He led these men in a coup, assassinated his father, and proclaimed himself the great Chanyu, eliminating any rivals with ruthless efficiency. This was not just a story of personal vengeance, it was a blueprint for power on the steppe. Madhu understood that to unite the fractious nomadic tribes, he needed to forge a new kind of loyalty, one that superseded clan and bloodline, a loyalty directed solely at the state and its supreme commander. He reorganized the Xiongnu military into a decimal system of rigid hierarchy, with commanders of 10,000, 1,000, 110, all answering directly to him. With this discipline machine, he smashed the Donghu people to the east, drove the Yuezhi to the west in the migration that would eventually create the Kushan Empire, and then turned his gaze south. He humiliated the newly established Han dynasty, surrounding and nearly capturing its founding emperor, Geyazu, at the Battle of Beiding. The Chinese had no answer for the Xiongnu's tactical brilliance, their ability to appear as if from nowhere, unleash a storm of arrows from composite bows, and vanish back into the grasslands. The Han were forced to sue for peace, offering vast annual payments of silk, grain, and wine, and even sending princesses to marry the Chanyas in a humiliating policy called Hekin, or peace through kinship. For decades, the Xiongnu Chanyas were not just rivals to the Han emperor, they were his overlords, extracting wealth and recognition from the settled civilization. Yet here is the profound historical asymmetry that defines them. Everything we know about Madhu and his successors comes from the meticulous, detailed, and deeply biased records of the Han court historians. To the Chinese scribes, the Xiongnu were the barbarian other, the perpetual threat from beyond the civilized world. Their annals describe Xiongnu customs with a mix of fascination and contempt, painting them as cruel, greedy, and childlike. They recorded the names of Chanyas, their battles, and their demands for tribute, but always through the lens of a bitter enemy and a wounded pride. The Xiongnu themselves left no such chronicles. As a nomadic culture, their history, laws, and royal lineage were preserved orally, in epic songs and stories recited around campfires. They had no need for static archives of clay or bamboo. Their library was the memory of their people, passed from generation to generation on the wind-swept plains. This living history died with them. The Xiongnu Confederation, after centuries of conflict with a resurgent Han, eventually fragmented under internal strife and military pressure. The constituent tribes, the Huns, the Xianbei, and others, scattered. Some were absorbed into the Han frontier. Others migrated westward in the great movements of peoples that would centuries later shake the Roman Empire, possibly contributing to the Hunnic Confederation under Attila. In this diaspora, the continuous thread of their royal legacy snapped. The specific genealogies of the Chanyas, the oral epics that celebrated Madhu's genius or lamented a later ruler's failure, dissipated into the cultures of their descendants. They became a people without a self-authored past, their mighty dynasty remembered almost exclusively through the careful, resentful ink of the civilization they once held for ransom. The Chanyas ruled an empire of grass and sky, and when that empire dissolved, their stories vanished into the same boundless horizon. The Chanyas of the Xiongnu cast a long shadow, but they were not the last to rule the northern steppe. 2 centuries after their confederation fragmented, a new power rose from the ashes of their dominion, inheriting their ambition and their ultimate fate. These were the Khogans, the final great nomadic empire to emerge before a revolutionary new force, the Turks, changed the political language of Central Asia forever. For nearly 200 years, from the late 4th to the mid-6th century, the Rouran held sway over a vast territory stretching from Manchuria to the Tarim Basin, a constant, looming threat to the fractured kingdoms of China's northern dynasties. Their rulers bore the formidable title of Khogan, a term meaning supreme ruler over other kings, a claim of universal authority that would echo through the ages. We know their names from the meticulous chronicles of their enemies, figures like Ujiulu Shelon, the fierce founder who unified the tribes, and his descendant Ujiulu Anagwe, who demanded and received a Chinese princess as tribute, a humiliating but necessary peace for the settled dynasties to his south. The Chinese records describe their military tactics, their political demands, and their internal coups with the detached, analytical eye of a civilization that saw them as a permanent, violent fact of nature, a storm that could be weathered but never truly tamed. Yet these annals, for all their detail, are a view from behind the Great Wall. They tell us what the Ruran did, but they cannot tell us who the Ruran believed themselves to be. The voice of the cognate itself is utterly silent. As a nomadic confederation, they left no cities, no palaces, no stone stelae boasting of their lineage. Their history lived in the oral epics sung around their campfires, in the genealogies memorized by their shamans, and in the diplomatic messages sent on perishable materials that turned to dust. When their end came, it was not a slow decline, but a sudden and total obliteration. The very people they had dominated, the Gurktuaks, rose in a massive rebellion around the year 552. The Turkic leaders, Bumin and Istemi, shattered the Ruran army, hunted down the last Kogan, and systematically dismantled their political structure. The Gurktuaks were not content with mere victory. They sought to erase the Ruran as a rival source of legitimacy. The royal clan was massacred, its survivors scattered to the winds. Those who escaped fled westward in a desperate migration, possibly becoming the people known to the Byzantines as the Avars, who would go on to terrorize the frontiers of Europe. But in that flight, any continuous record of their royal past was severed. The Kogan story, as they themselves told it, died on the steppe. This creates a haunting historical paradox. The Ruran were the necessary precursor, the empire that the Gurktuaks overthrew to claim their own mantle of power. They perfected the model of the steppe cognate that the Turks would then inherit and expand. Yet, because the Turks so thoroughly eradicated their ruling line, and because no internal Ruran chronicle survived, they exist for us only as a reflection in the records of their enemies and the empty space they left behind. They are the ghost that made the next empire possible, a dynasty erased so completely that even its echoes are faint, remembered only as the formidable shadow that once fell across China before the dawn of a new age. The story of these 30 dynasties is not 30 separate mysteries, but a single, haunting lesson written in the silence of time. Whether shattered by the swords of conquerors, gently dissolved into the culture of their neighbors, choked by a changing climate, or simply forgotten when the last scribe laid down his stylus, their fates whisper the same truth. No power, no matter how grand or seemingly eternal, is immune to erasure. The Xiongnu Chanyas, who once dictated terms to China, survive only in the resentful chronicles of their enemies. The Minoan priest kings who commanded the seas left behind undeciphered scripts and vibrant frescoes of a world they can no longer explain to us. The lords of Cahokia, who reshaped a continent with mounds of earth, took their names and titles with them when they walked away from their soaring city. History is not a solid record, but a fragile, fragmentary thing, a story told by the survivors, the victors, and the stones that outlasted the people who carved them. Each of these ghost dynasties is a stark reminder that our understanding of the past is built on a foundation of profound gaps. We piece together puzzles where most of the pieces are missing, trying to hear an echo in an empty hall. The grandeur of a monument like Great Zimbabwe or the sophistication of a Harappan city plan forces us to ask, what magnificent stories are we not hearing? What epic poems, what chronicles of wisdom or folly, what very names of kings and queens have been lost to fire, flood, or the simple, relentless decay of paper and memory? These vanished realms challenge our arrogance. They ask us to look at the mightiest empires of our own age and wonder, what of their essence would remain if their language was lost and their cities buried? So now the question turns to you. Which of these silent kingdoms lingers in your mind? Does the tragic exile of the Toltecs Quetzalcoatl haunt you, or the sheer logistical genius of the Garamontes in their desert empire? Perhaps it is the chilling anonymity of the Hephthalite Kogans, conquerors who left no story of their own. The conversation about history is not finished, it is waiting for more voices. Tell us in the comments below which forgotten dynasty you find most compelling, and what other lost kingdoms you believe are still out there, waiting for a shovel, a satellite image, or a deciphered script to pull them back from the brink of oblivion. If you want to keep exploring history's greatest disappearances, make sure to like this video and subscribe. The past is full of ghosts, and every new discovery gives one of them back its name.